Okay, sorry.
You can just minimize. Oh, yeah, there
Too many screens here. All right, so my name is Yvonne. I wouldn't worry about the last name. So this is the presentation that we did at RTC, the Revit Technology Conference. It was in Vancouver. It was really nice weather. Good to go?
Hopefully it'll update. Yeah, keep going.
Okay. And I know we kind of talked earlier, there's Revit Technology Conference and then there's Autodesk University. My personal opinion is I really like the RTC. I think I've been to every single one of them in North America. So if you guys are debating on which one to go to, I would probably go to this one, especially if you use Revit. But we are going to talk about point clouds today, and this is sort of our perspective from our firm. We had a girl, Amy, who worked at our office, and she was kind of mostly responsible for this, and she's in Texas now, but we are not going to talk about how to scan because we didn't do that. I just want to stress that enough. But if you guys have any questions, I'm sure there might be others here that have answers for that. Let me get on the right screen. So this is kind of my introductory slide because it's all about me. Just kidding. I had my first exposure to Revit in 2003. I think that's when Autodesk bought Revit, and I think it was version 2 or 3. Graduated from Ball State University in 2006. I first heard of point clouds in a House of Cards video by Radiohead. I don't know if you guys have heard it. It's a pretty good song, actually.
Keep going. Sorry.
And I've been with SGA for about 7 years. I think it's almost 8. And worked on our first Revit project in our office. Actually worked with this guy, I think, on it. And we definitely had some good times on it. And I am licensed, so this is strictly from an architectural perspective, not scanning or anything like that. And in 2010, we started looking into point clouds and doing some research, and currently work with one of the best teams at our firm. Megan's here, Cornerstone. But this is what this was my icebreaker here, guys. So just this is what the House of Cards video looks like. It's a little bit hard to tell, but they fly through these streets and these these kind of buildings. They appear out of nowhere, and they use a long-range laser on this. It's a pretty cool video. Maybe we can look at it later. And here's the presentation. We'll talk a little bit about the history and kind of how they're used, when to use point clouds, the benefits of point cloud technology, how SGA, we've used them, and kind of other uses that you can have for point clouds. So this can be a really brief. This is kind of what a 3D laser scanner looks like. Basically what it does, it's just like a laser pointer. It just kind of, you set it up and it just does a 360-degree turnaround and measures. So basically whenever the laser hits a surface, it comes back, hits the mirror in this thing, and it all happens really fast. And it just records the XYZ of the point that it hit on a surface. For civil purposes, you probably want to use the pulse phased. It's for longer distances. I'm not really going to go into the technology of it, but if you guys are hearing people talk about this, and then there's the phase based, and that's more shorter distances, and it's a little bit faster, and you get a little bit finer detail on it. The pulse phased longer distances, civil ones, they were used primarily, from what I understand, is they would fly it in an airplane and they would follow pipelines, and they would just find out the contours of the land with it. So it was you covered a lot of area really quickly with it. So what are point clouds? And I kind of started talking about it a little bit, but it looks like an image, but that's really what it is. It's the little points of where that laser hit the surface and recorded the XYZ. That's why it looks really pixelated. lately what they do is they take a photo and they'll actually color the little points, and that's why it kind of looks like a photograph, because the little points actually get that, you know, they get pixelated by the color that comes from the photograph. And by the way, guys, feel free to jump in and ask questions during this whole presentation. So how are points clouds used architecturally? This really all started, we do a lot of retail projects. So there was kind of a rash that we had where we would go into existing buildings and we need to quickly scan them and then reappropriate them for a new client. So what are the benefits of this and why do we do it? You know, these things are really, really accurate, like way too accurate a lot of the time. So, and think of it, I kind of think of it as JPEGs. So you kind of have the DPI, the dots per inch, and these are very similar. So you can get a lot of results, you know, a lot of points really quickly. And a lot of times you have to scale them down for what it is that you need. So this looks like a photograph, but it's actually that colored point cloud, and it's the ability to virtually visit a site. So in this image, we're looking from a perspective of the scanner itself, and it kind of does like a Google Street View type of deal where you can turn around in 360-degree plane and look around and feel like you're on the site. Also used for coordination between disciplines or consultants. The image on here is the kind of grayed out circle is where a structural engineer placed their column, because I like to put them on grids. It's weird. And the point cloud, you know, it was a little bit off. So that's the other point I want to make here, is that nothing's perfect in real world, right? Not a single wall is perfectly orthogonal or even plane, and that's one of the things you kind of have to start talking with your consultants, is like, how much detail do you really need? For us, you know, if it was in the middle of a sales floor and it wasn't a big deal, go ahead and put it on the grid line. Now if we're trying to wrap the column with some kind of furring, you probably want to go into a little bit more detail. Increased quality. So this is a section of a point cloud that we did, and as you can tell, you know, the jib goes up to a certain height and it stops, and then you just have studs above, and you have the joist. So these are things that are almost virtually impossible to measure when you're out there on site, especially to get up into the joist. And the time for us. We were able to send less architects and less MEP guys, so you would really have like one architect, and he's verifying the quality of objects and not really worrying about their location so much. And there's a two or three person team that goes out there and actually does all this. So we were able to lessen our on-site time, and we didn't have people out there measuring every column, every joist.
Real quick, Yvonne.
Yes.
I'm going to give everyone a chance to ask some questions while I try to fix our video for the recording real quick. So everyone has questions. Go ahead and ask them right now.
Is that what software are you using to view those images, those first few images we see?
I think we'll get into it a little bit more and we'll talk about it, but I think it's called Point Share or something like that. I think it's on my slide. I'm sorry, I forgot. Go.
I think we're good to go now.
So obviously a lot of things we'll talk about here is retail, because that's what we do. We'll talk about takeover projects, you know, how we verified and coordinated everything. Let me get to the screen now. So I mentioned this earlier, existing buildings, new owner, quickly get in there, retrofit it, and get out. Gather a lot of information, and then coordinate with the point clouds, you know, where the new conditions interface with the existing. So some of the challenges that we face, this is fairly new. It's been used for civil work quite a bit. So a lot of software you get, it will do terrain beautifully because that's what it likes to do, and it's been doing that for a while. But architecturally, it's still kind of still figuring it out. So we seriously just threw a new intern that we had, and we said, hey, here's some point clouds, try to do stuff with it. So it was fun. A lot of time it was just trial and error, honestly. It was a new tool in Revit. I want to say 2012 introduced the point clouds, and then they refined it a little bit in 2013, and so there wasn't really a whole lot. It was like you can link in a point cloud and you can unlink it, and that was really it. So any of the objects that you were trying to create from point clouds, there wasn't much to it. It was new to our consultants. As I've mentioned, this is very accurate, and so when we're saying, you know, the column is actually over here, structural guys were kind of like, yeah, it's fine. So we kind of had to work with Wallace. I know Eric, I think, was doing it, Eric Randleman. So it was a little bit back and forth, and it was new to our clients. We were kind of the ones who went to our clients and said, here, we want to do this to save some time. And of course, it just sounds scary, so I think they were a little bit apprehensive in the very beginning. Receiving and handling scans. So we had a third party. Just want to once again clarify, we didn't scan these things. We had guys go out there and measure it for us. They knew how to do it. The fee was fairly reasonable. And these are really huge files. We seriously got like hard drives that they would mail us in snail mail. In order to receive them. A lot of information in these things. And we got .fls files and .fws, and I'll talk, oh yeah, that's right there, I guess. The FLS files are individual scans. That's what the scanner kind of, you know, once it does it, finishes. And then when you compile these things together all into one big model, it's the FWS. And there's numerous different things. I think like Leica has their own, and I know in 2014, I think Revit accepts even more formats.
So Dropbox is probably not a good solution.
Dropbox probably not a good solution. Yeah, I mean FTPs are not a good solution.
What about a formatted Autodesk Design Premium Suite USB?
Probably not. Email is probably not appropriate either for these things. They were huge. Bringing scans into Revit, so they kind of work a lot like if you were to link in a Revit file, they work the same way. And actually, when you hit your VV, I think it was under imported categories where this stuff would show up. And what we would do is we started using work sets in order to have some kind of control of this. We first took the whole, the FWS files, and we put the whole thing into Revit, and that just bogged it down, essentially, is what happened. So, okay, that didn't really work. So we started bringing in the individual scans, and we started grouping them. So, like, all the ceiling stuff would go together, all the exterior stuff would go together. And just like Revit and links in general, you know, if it's moving slow, you can just turn off as many links as possible. You know, make Revit think less about all the data, and that made it a little bit more manageable.
Now it has its own point clouds. Is that
Tab,
better?
does it? Yeah, you're right. I think there's a little bit more control over it. We used this a lot in 2012, so it was very new at the time. So when you bring the FLS files into Revit, it's going to go through and convert it to this PCG file. That's just kind of what Revit uses. And here's kind of some of the tips. We talked a little bit about it. So make different work sets, and maybe there's some new tools in Revit. So we used to do a lot of these, and it, kind of the whole takeover thing slowed down a little bit, so we haven't been doing quite as much of these, I'll be honest. And then your really big friends can be your section box, because there's really no categories. It's just one big mass. So you really kind of want to section it down to something understandable, because when you look at the whole building, and we'll look at some of the images, it's a little overwhelming. And just work on small portions of the building, and like anything in Revit, turn off everything that you don't need. So this is kind of what they look like, especially after you use a section box on it. And I think I was talking with somebody earlier, you can tell these little, we call them little hot spots, but that's where the scanner was standing. So you can't really scan directly below itself and directly above, or you'll just see a tripod. So once you kind of start sectioning these things down a little bit, it really starts making sense. So here, I don't know if you guys can tell, but there's a lay-in ceiling right here, and you can start to see some of the lights showing up. And here's what it looks like in plan. So this is the overall image of the building and of the site. It's a little overwhelming. You really can't tell what's there, and especially like this store had a lot of shelving in it. And just like a flashlight, these lasers, I mean, once they hit an object, they really don't penetrate it. It's not an X-ray. So if there's stuff in the way, it's gonna prevent stuff from behind it from being scanned. And once again, once you kind of section it down, you can start making sense out of what's happening here. So all these white areas, that's kind of probably where the walls are. You can see the wall, the door right there was closed. And you can tell when they were scanning on the outside, there was I guess it was like parking blocks or something, but everything behind it just didn't get scanned. So that's why when you go into a room, you really need to do multiple scans if at all possible. I know sometimes in small spaces that's really hard to do, but if something blocked it, you're just not going to get the information behind it. So this is the software that we use. We use the Ferrocene and WebShare. I thought it was PointShare, but Ferrocene and Ferrocene WebShare. Ferrocene is a standalone license that you can put on your machine and you can look around. And then there's the WebShare one. And what we did there is our third-party scanning company, they put it on a server, and then we were able to just log into that. And it's, I think there's a little bit bigger picture and a little bigger image here on the next slide, but you're able to just look from the perspective of the scanner more so than anything else, and you can kind of have a bird's eye view where all the little hotspots, where all the scanners were, and then you can double click on it and it'll take you to that view. We were also able to send this to our clients, and you know, if they had any questions, we can have them log in and they can really see what this looked like and some of the challenges that we were having. And the nice thing about this is we didn't really have to send out the first time we did it, we got a hard drive and then we like send it to Wallace, and Wallace sent it to HEI, and then they send it back to us, and we send it back to the point cloud people. So it was really nice not to have to do that every time you know, somebody else wanted it. But this is the Scene LT, and it kind of looks like Revit. You got your little project browser here, double click on it, and there you are outside of this. Nice thing is, since these are 3D coordinated points, you can actually go in there and start measuring between surfaces. The bad thing is, if you can't see a surface, you can't measure to it. So like the other side of this column, like if you wanted to find out the width, you know, you kind of had to use edges or trying to find a view where, you know, both of these planes were showing up. But it was a very good way to verify, because inevitably whenever you go out to site and you just use paper and pencil, you forget to write something down, or it's nice to verify. And especially some of these heights, even with the handheld laser, you can sometimes shoot up there. Sometimes it's a little bit harder. But here you're able to measure anything that you can see, essentially. So we tested a few different softwares and plugins for Revit. The Clear Edge 3D Edgewise Building. That was really new when we started dealing with it, and we really like that software, or I really like that software. That was the only one where you can put a whole point cloud and you can say, go find all coplanar points and create a surface out of it. Of course, if you had some kind of, if there's a shadow being cast, you know, on that surface, then it would make two different pieces, but at least you had some kind of plane that you can measure to that was an actual object. And they've come a long way. They just released a new version. We haven't really played with it yet, but it should be pretty exciting. Really, this was invented for pipes and mechanical rooms, and that's kind of the progression of this whole point technology. Is they started with measuring really big pipes over terrain and elevation changes, and then of course a lot of times you get into mechanical rooms and they're pretty messy in there, especially with retrofitted buildings, and just climbing around trying to find some of these pipes is really hard. But they have started extracting walls, windows, doors, and floors. I think their latest version will actually try to pop in a Revit family into door and window locations. We also used Imagine It Scan to BIM. This was an actual plug-in into Revit. You can kind of tell you get your own little tab here, Scan to BIM. And pretty much all these three other ones, what you have to do in order to get a wall is you have to pick 3 points that are coplanar, and then it will just extrapolate from those 3 points. So that sounds really good and handy, and on YouTube videos it works every time, of course. The problem with real life is, since there are points, a lot of times you can see through that stuff, so you really don't know if you're grabbing a point that's on that wall or someone that's a point that's beyond that wall. So it's a little bit tricky, and that's where we found out the section box is really helpful. You can kind of cut it down so you don't have that accidental clicking on the wrong thing. The nice thing about this one is it would go through and it would color the points in a plane, and it would color them according to how much out of plumb they were with one another. So if you're doing like existing floors and there's dips, it would like color them blue if they went down, and they would color them red if they came up. The point clouds did. So if you want a perfectly flat floor, you kind of know where you need to concentrate on. Once again, there's this little measuring tool inside of it, so you can measure between points, because Revit will not click to those points. Like, you can't say align to this thing. And right here is the wall region grow. That's where you pick the 3 points. You can kind of tell there's 3 stars, and then it spreads out from there. Honestly, all the other points all the other little buttons are pretty much useless from what we found out, or for what we were using it for. We used Qubit. This was really a plugin for AutoCAD, and when we first started doing it, a lot of times, and our third-party scanning company, this is what they would do. They would bring it into AutoCAD, and then you draw a line of where the points are, and it'll do a best fit for that series of points. And so they would just essentially section off a building, let's say at 3 feet, and then redraw stuff in AutoCAD, and then bring it into Revit and then retrace it. So obviously it was just one more step, and didn't really always illustrate what was happening in the point clouds very well, because you obviously sectioned it off, so anything above 3 feet you didn't really know what was happening. So we didn't really like that very much. And then Autodesk Collabs, there was that feature extraction, and it just came out. It was very new. It was free, so we just downloaded, played around with it. It also did the walls, floors, levels. The biggest thing that we found out, the nicest thing about it, is you can quickly control the on-off points within Revit, and that's what I think they incorporated in this latest version. So honestly, none of these things worked perfectly, especially at the time when we were playing with it. So we'll talk a little bit once we get to some examples of how we actually did it. But this is a little bit of why we're trying to put it into Revit. And I think we all know the benefits here. It's 3D dimensional data. You can look at the building from any angle, and you can measure things. So we're going to move a little bit into the projects. So in order to protect the innocent, they're all called like Project 1, 2, 3, 4. That was a joke. So this was a strip mall that we went in. I believe this was our very first one. and we really had to work with guys that would scan and give us these things, because they get excited and they want to, just like photographers, they want to increase the DPI. And you're like, man, this is going to be coming out of a projector. It's 72 DPI, so I really don't need all that information. So just kind of be careful, especially for architecture. Larger isn't always better in this case. So this is kind of us trying to hone it down a little bit, so it looks a little bit pixelated for that reason. This project was an existing electronics store, and you could tell there were shelves in here because there's, you know, little white spots all over the place. So obviously the more things you have in there, A, you get more points that you really don't need, and B, it just kind of clutters everything up. You can tell how many times we had to scan this building on the interior to capture all the information. We would have 150 up to 300 scans, I think, per project.
These images that you're showing, are they out of Revit or are they out of the Faro software?
So this one is out of Revit. I'm glad you brought that up, because in this corner we actually turned off the point clouds, and everything that you see right here was the Revit walls that we traced in there, just to kind of give you a little bit of contrast to show how it works. Sections were really useful. These are the things that are kind of really hard to measure and look at out on site, because, you know, I'm like 5'6", so but you can definitely tell where suspended acoustical ceilings are, some of these plenum spaces out here, and you can tell some of the Revit doors peeping through over here, a little bit zoomed in. You can tell some of the Revit walls that we've put in. This is another section of it. We kind of looked at this earlier, but really the best way we found out to use it is wherever there's white spaces, you kind of assume it's a wall essentially, and then once you come to these kind of bulky items, that's when you really need to start looking at it from the perspective of the actual scanner. And then you can really start telling if it's some kind of furniture or something in the way. And once again, these circles are where the scanners were standing in rooms. So obviously when they scanned from this perspective, there was something in the way, so that's why you really don't have any points beyond that. This is like a 3D section of the same thing we looked at. I know it's a little bit hard to tell, and I think that was part of the learning curve. It's kind of like x-rays, you know, when you first look at it, it kind of makes no sense. But then the more you look at it, you can start picking out like toilets over here and things that are hanging on the wall. Once again, this was helpful to find out, you know, what some of these blobs, the white blobs, were. This is kind of side by side here. When we first started doing it, since it was so new, we did everything in black and white, so we didn't really do any of the we didn't really color the pixels any, and that was obviously a lot harder to tell. I think with our second, third project, we started doing color on the exterior, mainly for like entitlement reasons and what do we need to paint, what we don't. Since a lot of times we were gutting these buildings or you know, leaving some portions of it, we did just black and white, and that's just so we can say which walls to demo. Essentially, we didn't really focus on all the detail. And then in later projects, the guys who were scanning, they're like, oh, it's so fast, let's just do color everything. So that was really helpful. Project number 2. There's kind of some perspectives. So once again, this isn't a really badly pixelated photograph. It's actual 3D, spatially coordinated, you know, points that you're looking at that have been colored by the photograph. Once again, it was an existing sports store. It was vacant, so as you can tell, there was a lot less intrusion on the way here as far as shelving goes. And because it is colored, you can actually start telling where the shelving used to be or where some of the material changes on the floor were. So sometimes we were trying to pick everything up and replace it with other tile, and sometimes, you know, we were leaving as much things as we could with the existing. A little bit more zoomed in here. I can kind of tell there's actually Revit walls that are overlaid on top of this scan here. A little bit more readable. And here's that same area just in a 3D perspective. And you can kind of tell how this exterior wall, how it's actually slopes down, and you can tell where the grade was. That was really helpful. And we've even kind of looked at maybe using this for ADA requirements for sites. And it seemed like the fastest way was to, you know, section this thing off. Anything that was white, you start going in and putting walls in, and you can kind of tell where some of the doors were. And so we would just pop in generic Revit doors, and then later put it into 3D and start refining some of the elevations of the walls and how the doors actually looked. You can kind of tell some of the fixturing within the restrooms here and sinks. You know, in some of these really small rooms, you're only able to fit the scanner in one area, so that's when you really hope there's not a whole lot of junk in there. A little bit zoomed in. I'm sure you guys recognize this out of the box door labels in Revit.
Did you find yourself using just as close as you could to measurements out of the box wall types, or did you try to create wall types that were right, like the eyeball?
That's a good question.
Distance?
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier that nothing's perfect
Right.
in this world, so we really had to make a determination, because no matter how much they try, these walls are going to have different thicknesses. So really you would just assume that it was this thickness of wall, and then you just either put it down the center, or like with exterior walls, a lot of times we would try to line it up on the inside because that's what we're trying to measure to for construction documents. Really didn't care what the exterior conditions were because we were just, let's say, painting it. So once again, if you have somebody scanning and building these models for you, you really need to talk with them about what's important to you. And I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, but really need to start paying attention to the level of development, the LOD of these elements, because it's easy to get carried away and just start over modeling things. These things are really accurate. It's a little bit hard to tell maybe, but there's a truck camper shell right here. And I believe there was actually like a sleeping bag inside of it when we were scanning these things. But
So not quite vacant.
mostly. It's right. So honestly, whenever you have objects like this, they start really blocking some of the things that are in the background. So here there was 2 scans, so we were able to catch the stairs on the other side of this camper shell. You can tell there's a little bit of shadow outline right here, and that's because the railing from this perspective, you know, blocked those points from getting to the wall. And I know I keep saying that, but that's a really big deal, especially once you start modeling and trying to figure out what's happening there.
Do the guys that did the scanning not move anything? They just come in and
Pretty much, yeah. A lot of times, you know, for them, you know, time's money as well, so they're just trying to get in there and
that you pay them for it.
right. Right. I think their thing is we'd rather just scan more times and then maybe capture stuff behind it.
We do a lot of existing work, and do they charge you per scan, or how does that?
We did a fixed fee. That's what we usually like doing. So, you know, we would kind of give them the location and what the square footage was. If there was a ceiling that they had to go above, that was a big deal. Because if they have to pop out tiles and stick equipment up there, that gets a lot more expensive. So I think for us, the scanning was about $10,000. I'm just kind of giving you guys a ballpark area here. And these were mostly like 50 to 60,000 square foot buildings, so they weren't really huge, but they were sizable. Luckily, a lot of these, since there were stores, they're really open on the inside, so that, you know, you might have about 20 rooms of offices, things like that. But I'm sure the prices dropped a lot.
What was the price range that you're talking about? Was that 2 years ago, 3 years
That was probably about when we started 2 years ago, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I know, the biggest thing they was worried about was ceilings, acoustical ceilings, because those are really hard to deal with. The biggest kind of pain, from what I understand, is you can, stick a piece of equipment up there, and you can get everything up there, but you need to have a little bit of window of what happened below, so you can line up the scans, so they can match them up. Otherwise, you really kind of don't know how it lines up with what's below, if that makes sense. If you have an exterior wall that it hits, that always helps out, so you can line them up. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll put these targets up all over the place, and they just kind of look like a black and white, cross. And so when they scan, the scans don't really know how far the scanner was from another. So they would just use these targets to say this point in this scanner is this same point in this other scanner. And so the more of these targets you have, the better chance you have of aligning these things. I know now they're kind of looking at, these little flying robots that kind of know where they are and they keep track of their location. So that's part of the problems. You have to go in and you have to hang these targets all over the place, just so you can align these scans, have some kind of common XYZ coordinate on this. So I think I can't remember, I think it was $10,000 to scan, and I think it was $10,000 to build a Revit model out of those point clouds.
Is that a reflection for you?
I think we had them do a very first one maybe, and then because of the LOD and what we cared about, we just kind of hey, we'll give it a try.
Is that a reflection in those doors?
That's actually stuff that's beyond the doors.
So are you putting it, so it's reading those doors is kind of transparent?
Well, it's the scans that happen inside the building, and since it's kind of, they're just point clouds, they're not solid surfaces, you can see through it. So if we had turned off the interior stuff, then it would just look like it.
So the scanner recognized that white, I'm assuming that overhead door was white,
Yes.
and it's assuming it as transparent, I guess? And you're not seeing a bunch of white?
I think he's just asking why there's not as many points on the surface of the door.
Oh
Just
yeah,
around
I
the
think
wall
just
around
blends in with the background of this presentation. That makes sense.
because it's white.
It was white, yeah. So I think it has just as many points as the right here. They're just not colored. And actually, right here is one of the targets. So on walls, they'll put up just paper targets, and then on out in the middle of the floor, they use these spheres, so they can pick up that shape.
Sorry to get you off time.
No, that was good. This is project number 3. It was an existing grocery store. It was empty. This was one of the black and white things, so you can tell it's a little bit hard to tell what's happening there. Once again, this has their Revit model overlaid on it. And this is where they come in really handy. A lot of times we wouldn't really change out the doors, but sometimes we had to, or we needed them for rendering. So in order to measure all these mullions out in the field would have taken a while, and I'm sure would have just taken a photo and just kind of estimated some of these things. Obviously getting up into some of these higher areas as well. And like I said, nothing is 45 degrees or 90 degrees ever, so it's helpful there. There's a few more shots on the exterior of the building. So I think there's a section later, but some of this glazing that's up high, that would have been really dangerous to climb up there and measure. Exterior. This one had shelving in it. Once again, you kind of just section off, parts of the building, and then you start tracing over where the negative space is in the scans. I think I remember this curved piece was kind of a pain to model in Revit. And then since this is a model of the existing conditions, you can kind of have these really cool perspectives of, so you can really understand what's happening with some of your elements. And I believe this one actually had people in it when they scanned. So there's people actually shopping and being checked out right here. You know, they say the lasers are fairly safe, but don't. But I know that.
It's safe,
But it's not. So I know the guys who scan, they would like cover up their faces. So I would, yes, yes, exactly. So obviously, once you have people walking and things like that, it gets a little bit messier because you have all this extraneous information. I think, and we probably didn't take a full advantage of this, but I think this is where using some of the 3D, some of the plugin applications would have been better, because you can go in there and actually try to maybe erase some of these points, you know, and just get rid of some of this information. You can kind of tell how Revit, you know, it kind of kept where that curve was for the for the storefront. You know, these areas like this, where it's just kind of plenum spaces, that was really helpful, because you can do the section box and you can really tell where the ceiling stopped, where the roof was. A little bit closer here. You can kind of tell there's an individual right there walking around. A little bit closer. So this is really where it's at. This is really where it was really helpful. And I thought this was funny. There's a guy actually just sitting there waiting for the scanner to finish rotating around.
Was he one of the scanners?
I think he was, yeah. So this is a big deal. Really, if you guys are modeling, that's one thing. If you guys are having somebody else model, really talk about what's important to you. Mentioned earlier, you know, do you care about the exterior face of the wall, the interior? You know, all the walls are not 5 inches or, you know, 5.5 or whatever. And they're not all plumb either. You know, they'll be either be leaning in, and some of the really long walls, you can tell they're really wavy. So really make a determination of what you need. I know I was reading a LinkedIn article, and a guy was talking about, you know, modeling this really accurately, and he was doing in-place families for all his walls to make them really accurate, which sounds insane. And then, of course, you know, there's some limitations with doing in-place family, you know, using those as walls. So I would really say don't do that ever, unless, you know, it's some kind of historic structure and you're really trying to be accurate with it. Then you're probably better off, you know, using some of the software that'll put like a mesh over the top of it and kind of smooth it out. So just be careful with over modeling. Some of these things, you know, we knew ahead that we were going to demo certain things. Honestly, don't spend any time on that. Just put a wall down, put it on the demo, and just move on. Obviously, you know, time and just bogging down your model with things you don't need is kind of a big deal. You know, don't model a lot of the exterior features if you're not going to be affecting them, which is kind of what we did a lot of the times. And keep stuff generic. It's a lot of time easier and faster just to make them all generic and then go back and refine it as you need it, either per section or per plan or whatever it is. You know, or if you're ripping off a JIP and putting new stuff on it in the Revit model, that's where you want to go in and focus all your time on things like that. But in the beginning, just do generic. Don't worry about stud and JIP or anything like that.
On your modeling, are you able to align the face of the wall to any of the points, or is it strictly eyeballing it in there?
It kind of, that's what it became.
If I want to put a beam in place of this point cloud of a beam, I'm just eyeballing it in there. I'm not lining any one face up. Right?
That's right. Yeah, you really cannot snap to these points within Revit. Like, you can't dimension to it, you can't use it to align.
You said something about you could get a face or whatever.
Put a mesh on it and then create a surface on it.
Yes.
You can't do that in Revit.
No, yeah, Revit right now will not let you do it. So,
well, that's what I know Eric would mess with that when he was messing with that.
mhm.
Was you know, he was talking about the discrepancies there or whatever, unfortunately, we're engineers, we like to be extremely accurate.
Right.
And it was very frustrating to him at the time when we were doing it. And I was just curious exactly what the process was when you're saying sketch a wall in or sketch a beam in. You're actually just looking at this
Yeah,
and
for
then
us.
drawing one in there and kind of okay about there. So you're kind of you got the accuracy of the point cloud, but then you got the accuracy of you,
Right.
whoever the person is creating the Revit model, what his accuracy is of getting it in.
Exactly right. And that's kind of the ironic part about it is you scan to get the accuracy, but there's so many things that affect how accurate you want to get with that object,
Right.
you know.
All the measuring you say, all that is done in the other software? Or
That's right.
That can't be done in Revit until you put something
That's
in
right.
there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I think that's where maybe like Edgewise 3D, you know, where it actually starts putting surface into it.
Right.
That's when you can start, because it becomes an actual object, and that's when
Right.
you can start aligning to it
Okay.
and measuring to it. I think the problem was, and this is one of the things I was talking about with those guys, is even if you ran it through the ClearEdge 3D software and it created all these surfaces, what I wish it would do is you could say make wall by surface. I don't know if you guys have used that feature in Revit, but that only works on the mass, what's the name I'm looking for? The conceptual mass.
Right.
So it works beautifully for that. So I was really hoping when these surfaces came in, that's what they would be. So I can just say, make the surface a wall, make the surface a wall, right?
Yeah.
But you're right, that's kind of the irony of it, is you have this like super precise point cloud and then you're using it as trace spacer
Right.
to some extent. But I think the technology is slowly getting there to
Right.
where you can
Yeah.
start messing with it. You know, I probably wouldn't recommend going the mesh way, especially for architectural things like this. You know, if we're doing like a really antique building, it might be a good thing. But what it does, it just triangulates all the points. And so you end up with a lot of surfaces, and these models are just, you can't deal with them, essentially.
It needs to normalize it like
Yeah.
it does in like manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's where some of the tools where they would color the things, they were trying to let you know that this is best fit, but keep in mind it's not perfect. You know, we didn't trace the whole thing. This is get into the bathroom. You know, some of the features and sinks and faucets. It's kind of easy to get carried away with what kind of sink is it, what kind of faucet is it. Once again, for us, we were honestly either demoing it or we were keeping it. So as long as it was close, it was pretty good. If we're doing historic restoration, obviously it would have been a much different approach. This is a point cloud overlaid on top of the Revit model again, and you know, it was pretty close. You can tell for what we needed. It was definitely a good thing. Zooming in a little bit more.
How often do you have to go back in and field verify?
That was the beautiful thing, is we didn't have to go out to the site ever again, because we had this model, and with the Faro web share, you can go in there and measure things, heights, if it really mattered to you. I know some of our department stores will send somebody out and then they'll go out again, like that's happened last week at our office. So with this, it was just a one-time shot. That's the beauty of having all this information, all this data. You may not use it, but when you need it, it's like, thank God it's there, you know. The other thing is clients, since they never change their minds, you know, a lot of times they're like, oh no, we're not going to do anything in this space. So if you were to go out there with pencil and paper, you would just focus on things that you anticipated to change, but inevitably it's always like, oh, what if this happens, you know? So here you can just go back to that model and really verify it. You can look at it.
They can come back in and add to that point cloud. I mean, you can call whoever you subbed out to do that work, they'll come back out and you can add to that model as it goes. Is that right?
Like point clouds.
Well, let's say if I was working on one side of the building and then they said, well, we want to develop the other side of the building now.
Oh yeah, we just scanned the whole thing. It almost seemed easier just to do the whole thing. We needed all the elevations anyway for permitting renderings and things like that. I would think they'd be able to add to it. We've never done it, so I really don't know. But I would think so. I think it'd be,
I mean, scope of work changes constantly.
Right.
And they decide they've got enough money to move into another area of the building constantly. And
yeah. Yeah, if you're doing a large
Yeah.
factory, that would probably make sense, yeah.
I would think as long as they have the registration
Mm-hmm.
for the laser, that would work fine.
I would think
Since
so.
it can be registered in that same way.
well, this is gonna be the same as civil,
Yeah.
lasers.
Laser
Right,
platforms,
you
yeah.
point and put it down a pin and they cover that pin and you drop it and then they're able to go back to that pin when they get back on site and
Yeah,
find it every
big
time.
spot.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, but the terrain modeling isn't as critical as this, so there's a lot of interpolation between those points.
Yeah, you're right. They're just trying to get a general idea.
That's
Yeah.
it.
They don't care where all the pebbles are. But a lot of times, honestly, I think of these things as JPEGs as far as the technology goes. You know, once you dumb it down, just like a JPEG, once you reduce the DPI, you cannot bump it back up unless you have that original image that you can go back to.
So you're bumping them down before you bring them into Revit.
You really want to,
Size
yeah.
wise, I mean, that's what was the other question. You're not bringing these and porting them directly into
No.
Revit.
No.
Yeah,
So-
it's-
Yeah, our philosophy was go ahead and scan it pretty high because you can always go down and not the other way around. So scan them high and then reduce them down to what you really need and focus on the things that you want. Let's see a little bit more about level development. So this is some of the other uses because you know, of course we got these and our bosses are saying, well, what do you think, you know, you can use these things for? So clash detection, construction visualization. So not all of these things we have done personally, but it was stuff that we've kind of explored to some extent. This was an actual example where you know, the client's like, oh, you know, don't worry about the roof. We're not doing anything up there. We're keeping the RTUs. We went ahead and scanned it up there. So we never really modeled the equipment because you know, it was what it was. They came back later and said, we want to put some skylights in here. And that's when it became critical where your fire sprinkler stuff was, where the RT units were, because you know, you can't be within so many feet of a skylight when you're working on equipment. So once again, it's all this information that you may not use, but when you need to, it's really nice to have. Construction. So this is probably where it's taking off the most right now. And I think I attended Autodesk University class, and this general contractor, they were pouring a concrete floor which had knockouts where they were running all their piping and everything through. What they would do is they would put all their collars, you know, stuff that was supposed to keep concrete from flowing into it, and then everybody would go home and they would quickly laser scan the whole thing, and they would overlay it with the Revit model. And then a lot of times they found that, you know, some of these knockouts were in the wrong spots. And so before pouring concrete, they were able to go ahead and fix where these holes were supposed to be. Whereas obviously if they didn't do that and they poured the concrete, they would have had to come back and cut and patch. And so a lot of times it's kind of like a QC, if you will, of the architectural work, of the construction work. And then visualization. Not all of these projects that we did were even done in Revit. Some of it just depended on who was available to do the work. But we still were able to take the point clouds and, you know, trace over them and then do all the pretty renderings for the AHJ, for the cities. And then the project managers, even if they were doing an AutoCAD, they really used, and we had one guy, Neil, in our office. He like loved the web share thing. He was in there all the time just measuring things and really verifying if things were where he thought they were. He would get on a conference call with our clients and show them, you know, talked about why it couldn't be or could be done. So obviously point clouds, they're pretty cool. I would say don't geek out too much with them. It's easy to get kind of sucked in and just start over modeling. I think that probably goes for Revit in general. And so this was obviously our perspective, how we used it. You guys might use it differently, but hopefully it kind of touched on some of the drawbacks and some of the benefits. So don't only think that this is like a Revit thing, you know, only, because you can use it for other things. And I know you guys have been good about asking questions as we went, but I don't know if you guys had any more. And I can go back to any slide that you guys want to see.
Better computer you have, the better you are.
Yes, you want to have, once again, that's Revit in general, I would say. But you're right, the larger these files, the more intricate these point clouds are, the bigger the space. That's when your section box can be your friend. The less it has to regenerate, the better off you are.
One to run the software, the web share software, and then have one right there with the Revit on it, separate, don't you, almost, just to take a measurement here and go back over here and.
The nice thing about the web share is it's on a server, so your server is doing most of the work. That was the other thing that we liked about it. So whenever you're doing the measurements, that server is doing the computation, you know, so you basically have a terminal at that point in time. So it's really just displaying what you're looking at. So that was kind of the nice thing about it. Plus all that data is not sitting on your hard drive, bogging it down. It's kind of like the Revit server idea in that regard, if that makes sense.
Have you looked at recap?
You know, I've heard about it. Haven't really had much time to investigate into it. Is it pretty cool, or?
From what I've seen of it, it's pretty cool. I mean, it allows you to be able to take the point clouds and just go in and clean them up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can eliminate the noise, adjust some of the points according to, you know, the distance from the scanner and the target object. Plus, from what I understand, it helps reduce that point cloud down. You know, bring it into Revit, it's not going to be as large. Or bring it into AutoCAD or Inventor, something like that. You know, and you have the color control on it as well. And it's standard. Recap is now standard in all three of the building design suite levels. So,
Okay.
you know, standard, premium, and ultimate.
Okay.
I've seen it on my desktop,
Yeah, it's just recap is reality capture scan. You know, that's all it is. So take a look at it and see what you think. Like I said, I don't have the point cloud to be able to mess with, so otherwise I'd play with it.
Now I'll probably have to ask my bosses, but I'm sure we can let you guys play around with some of the things. I don't see why that would be an issue if any of you guys are interested. And you're right, you don't really have to use the laser technology too. There's this stuff called photogrammetry, which is just kind of fun to say, but what it does is you take images with your camera, and then you're able to, I don't know what kind of voodoo they use, but basically like takes all the reflective light off the objects, and it'll make a 3D object out of photographs, which is amazing to me. It seems to work. I played around with that. It used to be Project Photofly, I think, on Autodesk Labs. So I downloaded it. I was playing around with it. It seems to do really well with smaller objects that you're kind of pointing inwards into. It seems to do a little bit worse with like rooms and really big objects that you're kind of looking out of. And I think it's because when you're looking in, you can kind of capture some of the more overlapping common areas, and then it kind of pieces it together better. And I know we talked earlier, you know, now they have these things you can snap onto your iPads and go through, and then of course there's the Connects, you know, they use the laser. So there's other technology to kind of capture reality as well. And I mean, you know, I kind of try to keep up with this because I think it's neat, but it seems like every month there's like a new thing that's coming out that you can play around with capturing reality.
Have you used the gaming engine?
No.
You can put that up with your Revit wall. It's a continuously rendering gaming engine. It's great for flying meetings and stuff.
You can walk through it.
You walk through it. You can hook it up to an Xbox controller if you get the driver set up for that, or you can use keypad or mouse. You can literally walk through, turn on gravity, run through stairs, and it will go through your whole project like you're in any sort of project.
Do you know if it'll do point clouds, or is it just a Revit model?
I'm not sure of the interface with the gaming engine. I haven't been on that side of that.
And honestly, as we showed, I mean, we're not like doing super duper stuff here, you know, with what we did with our model. So I kind of feel like everybody can have a use to it. You know, it's not just for high end things. But I don't know. Hopefully, I kind of explained this a little bit and some of the benefits and drawbacks. And just keep in mind, it's very new. So sometimes you just have to get creative with it.
It's very new to architecture.
It is very new to architecture.
Pretty old technology though.
That's true. I think it was started in 1950s, if I remember correctly, is where it all began.
Farrell was doing it with mechanical arm years.
Mm-hmm.
And then they went to the laser profilometers, and then of course there's Leica, and Farrell has its laser profilometer as well. But, you know, it manifested itself in the civil industry. Kind of migrated over to piping somewhat, but really got proven out in civil.
Yeah.
And just kind of bleeding over in architectural. Unfortunately, it just gives you, I mean, the good and the bad is you get something you can trace over, you get a frame of reference, you get an additional tool, but it leaves you wanting more. It leaves you wanting edges to be able to convert that raster data to an edge that you can measure from or put a surface on or to be able to use that data more than just to trace from. That's the worst part of it. The best part is that it does give you an accurate representation and the frame of reference to trace on.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, too bad we don't have that technology like we do in civil where, import a field book file, you push a button and have it automatically draw for you.
Yeah, like all of these software, they do really well with terrain. Yeah.
Chris,
I mean,
Chris, I am working on the design this building for me API button. Just so you know.
It's just automated from survey data.
Yeah.
You take survey data and it creates point cloud. You normalize that data and make a surface out of it. And there's your topology right there. So I mean, it's the next step. They're just doing it with lasers.
Yeah. And I know when I was presenting here at RTC, there's a bunch of people walked up and were talking with me, and now they have these little autonomous things that you can throw in a building and it just flies around wherever there's lack of points. It just kind of keeps going. I don't know how it knows where to stop, but it's like there's these little drones, which you're not supposed to use in. You're not supposed to use drones in U.S., but there are RC toys. But I mean, technology is pretty wild, and it's getting out there.
Were there any other questions? I had a couple things that we could play with here on Revit.
For anyone who doesn't know, the restrooms around the corner.
Any final thoughts?
I'm good.
You good? All right. Well, thanks, Yvonne.
Thank you, guys.
While this project is upgrading from, I think, 2010 to 2014,
Good luck, dude.
there were a couple things that kind of went into this topic, not specifically on point clouds, but on kind of ways that we're starting to get real objects into the computer for us to work with. And the first one that I came across, which kind of just blew my mind, was this one right here. And I'm just going
We
to play
introduced
this.
an interactive technique for modeling 3D man-made objects by extracting them from a single photograph. Our method intelligently combines the cognitive ability of humans with the computational accuracy of the machine. We first demonstrate the use of 3-sweep on basic shapes. To extract an object from a given photo, the user uses 3 strokes defining the 3 dimensions of the object. 2 strokes define the parts profile, and the third one sweeps it along its main axis. This procedure progressively defines a 3D body that snaps to the shape outlined in the photo.
So the same idea with point clouds. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but it's going to give you something to base what you're working
This
with.
example shows modeling a tap. After modeling, we map the texture from the image and edit the parametric model to achieve image editing. Before manipulating the object, the background is completed using the patch match algorithm. We change its rotary switch to cruciform and rotate it. Then we duplicate the tap and rotate it and attach it to a different side of the wall. This example shows modeling a telescope. While modeling each part, geosemantic relations such as parallelism, concentric, and orthogonality are automatically recovered.
The magic of Hollywood.
After modeling, we can easily edit the image part as it was in 3D. Here we show the rotating of the lens. In this example, a candle holder is modeled and rotated. With its two arms duplicated to a perpendicular position. We skip some rotating interactions here. We also enlarge the middle holder. In this example, a street lamp is being modeled. Then we copy the lamps to a lower position along the pillar and rotate by 90 degrees. The new modeled object is then copied to several positions along the street. In this example, a menorah from an oblique view is modeled. We copy and paste the candle holders by fitting them to the image, while requiring that they remain on the same plane and their sizes remain unchanged. This efficiently recovers the depth of each part. The final model is symmetric along the middle pillar, but we can rotate the arms to different angles. In this example, we model a samovar.
Who knows what this is? Tea a lot of times, but
Duplicating its handles around its body and rotating it. This example shows modeling several objects in a complicated scene, repositioning, rotating, or duplicating them.
I don't know what it was. Probably Revit telling us it was about to crash.
This example shows how we model a Hanoi Tower image and can then play the game in 3D. In this example, we model the obelisk in Paris from two images together. One image is a close-up view of the base of the obelisk and contains more details. The other includes the entire obelisk, but the base is somewhat occluded. We can use the base model from the close-up image, transport it to the image of the whole obelisk view, snap it to its position, and continue modeling. The texture of the base part is blended into the second image. In the close-up view of the full model, the geometric and texture details of the base are still visible. Here we show a side-by-side comparison with Stolf and colleagues' work on geosemantic snapping. More comparisons can be seen in an additional video.
So, not quite accurate
Here we
points
show
in
some
space,
failure
but
examples. In this example,
you can kind of see
due to non-ideal
where the industry is
perspective,
going with creating these, real objects and digitizing them for use for gaming or architectural. Or they didn't go into the name of the.
I wonder what the output was.
Yeah, it's probably something that's very conceptual. They don't even have like a file type, Yeah. The second thing that I want to show you guys came across. Thanks guys for coming out. If you have to leave. This is an iPad attachment, but they've actually created it for other mobile devices as well. But this is using the Kinect technology from the Xbox. That worked really well.
If you point the structure sensor out into the world, you're capturing the world. It's like giving some sort of a superpower to average Joe device.
What if you could give him
Let's try that again. it doesn't even want to load it now. Well, it looks like Chrome might have just crashed. Anyway,
You didn't pay your Xbox Live monthly.
apparently not. Anyways, it uses what is it?
Photogrammetry.
Photogrammetry. So
Photogrammetry.
basically, you hold your iPad up and you rotate it around like this, and it creates a 3D scan. I believe it comes back in a point cloud image of whatever you're doing, but instead of it, doing itself on its little rotating base. That one goes to the right on the other side of the main sanctuary window there. Oh, did it just come in like that, or?
There's no way to link a couple different movies together though, unless you had some kind of mark. Only one hotspot.
It's not a movie. It actually builds a file.
Yeah, but you can't bring a couple different scans into the same.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, you
You
could
wanna
probably
have one hotspot.
you could do the same thing. You could do the same thing that the scan companies do and post up some targets and line them up.
It does not like it right now.
It did finally. Is it not liking any? Oh, Chrome.
It's not
I've had that
liking Chrome.
happen before, and Rebecca's familiar with this project. This is actually a point cloud of a building you may or may not be familiar with right here in town, and you can see that it has the color. This is First Presbyterian Church right down on Boston, and they originally did the scan because they wanted to get some of the detail in a lot of this. Basically all the filigree and scroll work on the front of the church, and what they ended up doing was basically cutting a section of these. Let's see if I can get this to work. Just like Yvonne was saying, you come through here and you cut your section, and you can kind of start to see the actual shape of that profile. And you can come in here and this is where you kind of have to start eyeballing it, but you can get your profiles, and those profiles were eventually used to create, as close as they could, replicas of in Revit. And this goes back to also what Yvonne was saying, where you have a level of detail that you want to get to, but this model was actually sent to the stone the stone manufacturers to produce shop drawings for all the stone that was going to be used to recreate as close to exact replica of the existing tower. So this is an example of where point clouds were used with Revit and this was in 2010. So it's the technology's there and it's been used. You just have to have the patience to go through the pain of figuring out how to use it. So.
Yeah, this is like the opposite of what we did, basically.
As far as level of detail.
As far as level of detail. Oh my goodness.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming by. We'll see everyone next month. I believe we're here again. It will be on the third Thursday, which I think is October 15th or something like that. We didn't have time for BIM Q&A, so if there's no topic, we'll do that next month. Please help us out by cleaning up your area, and thanks for coming by. Let's see if I can find the...
Hopefully that was alright.